Alright, so I'm picking up exactly where I left off in the last video, so don't worry. I haven't skipped anything and you haven't missed anything. So next thing I'm going to do is open up the particle gradient PPG here. And you can see under the gradient position tab, we have down here input number 3. And it's checked on and we have our fractal scalar node plugged in there. Now, we can control where the gradient starts and ends with this input, which I'm going to leave at the default of 0 and 1, but the intensity I'm going to increase. Let's increase it to 0.75. That way this effect is a little bit stronger. Because if I bring up my render region here, I want the effect to be a little bit stronger and have a little bit more influence in the overall effect. And you can see the fractal effect. If you look closely, you can see that nice noisy effect is adding this nice chaotic sort of random look to the flame, which looks really cool and I really like. That's definitely what I'm going for. All right. Now what we can do is take this cell scalar node that we brought in and we can take it, plug it into the particle gradient, and let's plug it into this input under per particle input 4. So it's going to be input number 4. If we go back to the particle gradient PPG, we'll see that under input number 4, we do in fact have this cell scalar node plugged into the input. So let's activate this input number 4 by checking it on. And now we can adjust this one too. So let's close this. And what I'll do is I'll do the same thing with the cell scalar node where I click on the little V icon, I bring up the little render preview, and let's open up its PPG and start to adjust this one as well. Okay, there's not many changes I want to do to this. I can see the cell scalar, the way that the grayscale looks over here, kind of have these little spheres all over the place. What I'm going to do is I can show you how some of this works. We can lower the fill, for example, and make them darker so they don't have as much effect. We can also increase the color of the border, less contrast that way. I'm going to leave it like this. The contrast down here we can increase or decrease depending on the effect that we want to go for. But I don't want to go ahead and give it too much of a contrast, so I'll leave the min and max to 0 and 1. Over in the cell, we can actually change what we want here. For example, by default, we're set to random and less white spots. If we go to random and more white spots, we'll see we have more of these little white spheres. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn it off and just put less white spots. I'm going to leave all these parameters alone. Under texture support, I can do the same thing with the fractal scalar. I can put big noise, which is going to be so big that now you won't be able to really see this too much until you scale this down. So if I change the scale over here, you'll be able to see this. You can see there's a massive gray sphere, but that's not what I want. So we can go to small noise, but I don't want to add any more noise to this because we already have so much noise, although we could add more noise to it if we wanted to. And we'll go to default and we'll set the scale to something like 20, which was double what it was before, to add a little bit more noise to this. So this is the effect we get, and in the shader ball preview, this is what our particle will end up looking like. So let's close that. Okay, so those are all the changes I'm going to make for the cell scalar node. If we go back to the particle gradient over here, down here in the input 4, I'll leave the gradient start and end values at the default, which is 0 and 1, and the intensity and influence I can lower or increase depending on what the look that I'm going for here. And if I go ahead and do a render region here, this is what I get. The cell scalar essentially makes this fire look a little bit hotter. So you can see the hot core of the fire, the brightness of it is coming out more through these darker areas. Before it was a lot darker and we had more black and dark spots. Now we have less of that, so it makes the fire look more vibrant, makes the fire look hotter, which is essentially the effect that I was going for. Okay, so let me cancel out the render region. Let me close this. We don't need it anymore. We're pretty much done with this. I think we're good to go here. Now the next thing I want to do is bring in another node that we haven't used yet. So let's go over to the preset manager. I'll go to the particle category, and the node that I'm looking for is the particle gradient F curve. So let's bring that into a render tree here. Close the preset manager. This gradient F curve is going to help us to alter the effect of our particles here, and you'll see in a moment how. So let's take this gradient F curve. Let's take its output and let's input it here to the purple node here, the particle volume. Sorry, let's edit that out of the video, edit that out of the video, start again in 3, 2, 1. So let's take the output here of the particle gradient F-curve and plug it over here into the volume shader. And where we want to plug it into is the global gradient density. So let's plug that right in there. It's right below the global gradient color. Okay. Now if we open up the F-curve, we only get one parameter, which is this function curve, which controls the density right now of the particle effect. Okay, so let me show you exactly what this F-curve is doing, because at first it may not make any sense to you whatsoever. Let me unplug it from the volume shader, and let's render out the tip of the fire effect over here. So we'll render this out, and this is what we have. It's pretty solid back here. What we want to do is have this fade out a little bit right there. So to do that, we're going to use this F-curve. So let's plug the F-curve back into the global gradient density parameter there. And let's render this out again. And you'll notice something a little bit differently. The tip of the fire effect is not so strong anymore. It's being pushed back. That's what this F-curve does basically. Makes it fade out. So what we're going to do is take this this keyframe that's over here. Let's right click on it. Click on key properties, and for the value, let's change the value to something like 0.9 maybe, just to drop it a bit. And the effect's probably going to be very subtle. Okay, we don't want the effect to be too strong because we want the fire to remain pretty strong. Let's take these handles over here, like this one right here, and let's pull that to something like this, and it's going to have this kind of gradient fall off, so you can see how it comes down real slowly and real gently here toward the end. And if we were to take this keyframe and drop it even more, you notice that the effect is pushed back. The particles will be pushed back more and more. So the density is basically being affected by this F-curve right here, which is a great way of controlling your particles even further. So you have all these nodes like the F-curve and the fractal scalar, the cell scalar, the particle gradient to go ahead and control your particles however you see fit. Okay? Alright, let me close that. Okay, so let's have a step back here and have a look at our particle setup here. We have this F-curve controlling the global gradient density. We have the particle gradient here controlling the color. It's got a couple of inputs coming in from a fractal and a cell scalar. Particle shaper is determining the overall shape and the silhouette, the shape of the actual particle effects. And of course the particle renderer is taking all that information and piping it right to the material node so we can have this flame look like flame. So let me go back to the first frame. Let's play this again. We'll stop it, and then we'll do a render region over the entire flame to see what we have. And my render quality is pretty low, but you can see the fire effect pretty good. There's two things that are controlling my render quality, and that would be the actual anti-aliasing settings here for my render preview window, and also the particle renderer parameters. If I go here to the particle renderer compound and I go to volume rendering, I have it set to low settings, and my cell size is pretty big. 1.5 is too big. What I want to do for a final production render is set this to 0.75. Anything lower than that is going to take a pretty long time to render. It's not going to increase the quality by too much. And of course at the end I want to put my low settings to high settings or default if that looks good enough for you. So let me close that. I'm not going to put the settings up really high because there's still some more stuff to do here. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is set up some lighting for this particle cloud. All right, we need to set up some kind of lighting because if we render out the actual FlameThrower here, you'll notice something strange. Even though you have this really hot bright fire over here, it doesn't seem to be lighting up our FlameThrower, which in real life that would be the case. The FlameThrower would be brightly lit up, almost like there's this huge light over here, and there is a light being emitted from the flames. So let me close this, close the render tree out, and what we're going to do is set up the light for this. And we'll go ahead and we'll do that in the next video. I'll stop this video here because we've been going long enough. And in the next video, we'll tweak this and make some final setups here.